Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. This is Mrs. Marple, and we are getting ready to do a really quick winter activity. We're going to be making these fun watercolor snowflakes with oil pastel, watercolor, and some salt to have that salt reaction. It's really fun. So how to start this is, I'm going to let you guys make a bigger version of this. I just made a small version to start with. We are going to be working with a circle this size instead of this size. It'll have a little bit bigger of an impact on the paper that we're using. So on your white watercolor paper, you'll notice that it has a heavier weight to it, and it has the texture that watercolor paper has. So you want to make sure that we're really careful on this. So we're actually going to be practicing snowflakes on our sketchbook first. So I'll move this out of the way. I'm going to bring out my whiteboard to show you guys really quick just some basics about balance, because in this activity we're going to be working with radial balance, which means balance that is not just one-sided, but it's all the way around, like the spokes on a bicycle wheel or a wheel of a car or a sun, or just something that's all the way around, an umbrella, things like that. So to explain this a little bit better, I have this picture. I've got a few different things on this board, and what we're going to do is we're going to draw a line of symmetry. That's a line just right down the middle, and we'll kind of explain these. So everything is being split in half. So the dog up here, if you were to fold this piece of paper in half, each side is not the same. So we would consider this to be asymmetrical balance. This happy face, no, it's not perfect, but it's almost symmetrical, meaning the same on both sides. So we have symmetrical balance, asymmetrical balance, and then this guy over here, the sun, is what we call radial balance. So if I divided this again, horizontal and vertically, all of those pieces would be exactly the same. So like if I had a picky eater who wanted to make sure that their pizza slices had exactly the same amount of pepperonis on every slice and exactly the same amount of crust, that would be radial balance. So I could also divide this even further diagonally, and it would still be the same, because it's all the way around the same. So with our snowflakes, draw this over here. The easiest way to start is actually to draw a plus sign. And I have a worksheet that I'm going to give you guys with lots of different examples of snowflakes. But in your sketchbook, just ignore all of this, guys. We're going to start with a plus sign. Okay, now you're going to be drawing this lightly on your watercolor paper, but in your sketchbook, you guys can draw dark until you figure out what you want to do. And so starting with those lines, you can add a few more spokes, is what I call them. So I'm going to do a couple diagonal lines. And that is a really good base for your snowflake. A lot of them have different shapes on the inside, but once you start here, you could always go back and you could erase the center, and you could draw whatever shape you want in there. And snowflakes tend to be geometric, so you can use shapes like squares, triangles, rectangles, squares, or I already said squares, circles, anything like that. I'm just gonna start with that circle in the middle, and then you can add different lines and shapes to the spokes, but you need to make sure that they're the same. So I'm gonna mirror this down here and make sure that it's the same. If I were to put it in the mirror, so my triangle is facing up this way and it's facing down this way, so it's a mirror image of each other, not exactly the same. I'm going to draw the same thing over here. Okay, so every piece would be the same if I were to cut it in different directions. Now on these, if you want, you can make them shorter. Let's try that. And you could draw some different shapes. The idea here is that you're just repeating the same thing all the way around the spokes. So I want you guys to practice that in your sketchbook 3 times, 3 different snowflakes. You can use the ones on the pattern sheet, or if you want to come up with some of your own, that's fine too. Once you finish that, you're going to grab a watercolor paper. Actually, you're not going to grab it. I'm going to pass it out to you. And once you have that, you're going to get a plate. So please be careful with these plates, because I use them for 500 kids. I use them all the time. So you're going to center your plate, and you're going to lightly draw around your plate. And I'm going to use a marker because I want you to be able to see a little bit better. But please, please, please draw super light on your paper, almost like it's a whisper of a line, just barely seeing it, because watercolor paper doesn't forgive for dark marks. You can erase and erase and erase, and the line will never completely go away. So always drawing super light. It should just fit on the page. We want to use as much of this paper as we possibly can. Now, once you have that done, you can use your ruler. And if you want to measure where halfway is, you can, or you can just give me your best guess and find the belly button and put a little tiny dot. Remember, drawing lightly so that only you can see it. It doesn't need to be a big old polka dot, just a tiny little mark. Then you can use your ruler to draw that X, or the plus sign, your first two spokes. I do want you to try to make these lines straight, so please try to use the ruler. You don't have to use a tracer for all the shapes that you're adding to the spokes, but this is just a good way to start. And then of course you can add those extra lines, those extra spokes if you want them to be slightly shorter. Okay, so that is a good base right there. And then what you're gonna do is you're going to draw yourself a snowflake. Now I have an example over here that I started with glue. We're gonna do something slightly different, but you can see the pencil lines here. And then instead of going over it with glue, like Mrs. Marple did, you are gonna go over it with oil pastel. Now I have one here that has been gone over with oil pastel. I don't know how well you can see that because you're not really supposed to see the pencil line. So I drew super, super light, and then I drew over the top with oil pastel using a lot of pressure. So I pressed pretty hard. Not so hard that I hurt my hand and not so hard that it broke the pastel, but I wanted to make sure that I have a nice thick line of pastel to create that oil pastel resist. So we have our snowflakes drawn on our circle. Make sure you put your name. Just go ahead and put it on the front. We'll be cutting these out later, but for right now, having your name on the front is helpful for me. So if you'll do that. Then we're gonna be moving to watercolor. Now today we're gonna be using liquid watercolor. I've got lots of different colors. It's a little bit different than regular watercolors because you don't have to add water to it. It's already been diluted. I've thinned it out just a little bit, so it's just a little bit lighter in color. But you'll need a bucket of water to change colors because I don't want the colors to get all mixed up. So to start with, we are going to be doing a wet on wet technique. So I want you to just put some water as a base on here because we're gonna want this to spread really well. And wetting that paper will make, as soon as that watercolor touches the wet paper, it will really start to just go everywhere. And that's what we want. We want it to be abstract. We're not gonna be painting shapes with our brushes. We're just filling it in with color. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do some pinks, purples, and blues. I do have green and turquoise and things like that, but I am feeling these colors today. This will stain, so you might want to wear yourself an apron. You can see my hands are already pretty dirty. Liquid watercolor is a staining material, so just be aware of that. Wear aprons or be real careful. So I've got my brush. I'm going to dip it into my first color, and I'm going to drop it on my paper. And you can brush it over the top, or you can paint with it just like it is. Cleaning your brush in between the colors. I've got some magenta and I've got some blue. I'm gonna do this all the way around. You wanna try to avoid using purple and green together because it'll make brown. But all the other colors, just kind of think about your color wheel and what works and what doesn't. You can even use a little test paper if you want to see what those colors will look like. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna paint over all of my circle. Now, if it gets outside the circle, that's fine. Like I said, we're gonna cut this guy out, so no stressing about that. I'm really happy with the way this is looking. It's looking really good. And we wanna keep it nice and saturated with water because the next part is going to be salt. And the salt reacts with the watercolor a lot better when it's got kind of big puddles to work with. And the salt is gonna be the very last thing you do. So once you put that salt in, you are done. You cannot put any more paint on because it will ruin the effect. Okay, so what I'm gonna use is just regular salt from the grocery store. This is what you have at your kitchen table or at a restaurant in the shakers, things like that. So I'm gonna give you guys a little portion of this in a container, and you'll just use your fingers and pinch it and drop it on that watercolor. You don't want to do exactly the same amount of salt in every area. You want it to look more natural. So some areas can get a lot of salt, some can get just a little bit, some areas can get none. But the texture of it will also help it look like snow. I'm gonna pick this up, but I want you guys to leave yours flat as long as possible so that water can soak into the paper, but they look really fun. Once these dry, we will cut them out and we will be decorating with them. Okay, so I've shown you all the steps. We're gonna start the first day with the drawing the snowflakes, and then we'll talk about the other steps in just a little bit. Okay, thanks guys.